Welcome to already the seventh episode of the series PLM Green Global Alliance is talking with PLM related vendors. And we talked in the past with SAP, Autodesk, Dassault Systems, Sustera, Aras and PTC. And now, for a change, we are talking with the well-known PLM consultancy firm CIMdata. Together with my colleague in the PGA, Klaus Brettschneider, we welcome Mark Reisig from CIMdata. Mark, first of all, welcome to this session, and can we start with a short introduction from you, your background and your relation to sustainability?
Yes. First, thank you for having me, Joost, Klaus. Pleasure to be with you. My background, I've got over 40 years of experience in CAD, PLM, and a lot of people know me in the energy space. I've worked in the aerospace and defense and in a variety of industries, but in recent years, they know me from GE, and I've gone back and forth in my career between software and PLM. But this all started a long time ago when I saw a chart, basically sitting in high school in 1976. It's called the Keeling curve. And back then, as a background, I grew up and spent my summers on a barrier island in Surf City, New Jersey, and I love the ocean. And I saw this thing from the Scripps Institute, and that's where I wanted to go to school. I wanted to be an oceanographer. And the Keeling curve was the first proof that carbon dioxide was accumulating in the atmosphere.
And that was 76, as you said, huh?
This is 1976.
Yeah.
So I'm not a young guy. And Dr. Charles David Keeling started taking these measurements in Wanaloa, Hawaii in 1958. And they were at 313 parts per million. Today they're at 420.99 parts per million. But in 1976, to everyone else, this just looked like a chart in a class. To me, I was concerned not just that there was a lot of carbon dioxide going into the atmosphere, but I realized that, hey, the ocean absorbs carbon dioxide 50 times more than the atmosphere and 20 times more than soil and land. So the ocean would be warming. And wouldn't that cause all sorts of things? Now, at this particular high school, this was a prep school, a lot of really smart kids. So I started asking them, hey, don't you see the problem? Ocean warms, it becomes more alkaline, right? They agree, yeah, it should. So what? And I'm thinking, well, that's going to cause ice to melt. It's going to cause salinity. That causes the salinity to change. And there's things called phytoplankton and zooplankton, which most people don't care about, but that gives us 50% of our oxygen. So I'm thinking, why should I be studying for exams? We're all going to die.
Sounds like a positive thinking.
Exactly. So, but I saw this as a problem. And another basic problem that's kind of obvious, you have the same amount of carbon now that you've always had. It's just where it is. And clearly, it's going up into the atmosphere. So my friends did suggest to me, hey, this doesn't really prove anything. It could be the sun, more, solar heat. It could be more sun reaching the Earth. It could be orbital. It could be just a minor thing. A couple of years later, NASA proved that the same amount of sun was hitting the Earth's atmosphere. The stratosphere was cooling. And we did, in fact, have what we now know today as global warming and climate change. But that's what caused me to be interested. I My parents then decided that oceanography equated to surfing, another hobby of mine, and they thought, hey, you need to go off and be an accountant. Short version of this is I was saved from that by a guy who, my neighbor, who I helped with wind turbines. He wanted to try to erect in our suburban neighborhood. And this guy went on to become a Tarek Darwish, pretty famous nuclear project manager. So growing up, I had learned a lot about energy, not realizing it. He saved me from that and got me a job in CAD in 1978. And kind of the rest is history. I've always been following this.
Okay. Yeah, interesting. So from the beginning, you were already worried about the future?
Very much so. I also saw it as anyone that knows me knows I've invested in a lot of these, not just technologies, but solar and everything else. And from the very beginning, it was kind of ingrained in me that I had a grandfather, and the whole reason I was in this town called Surf City, New Jersey, is he was a entrepreneur and very successful, and was very much into giving back. And the way to give back was to invest in the future. That way you'll have the resources to give back. And so from a very early age, in fact, 1978, I began this journey. So it's not totally apparent when you looked at my LinkedIn, but I've owned health food stores, all sorts of different things. So I've been involved in this for a long, long time. You can tell from the books behind me, many of these are on this very subject. And so I was a little bit ahead of the curve.
I just want to make a joke about books, but then I realized would not come across right.
Yeah, I'm the guy of the e-reader.
I think Jos and I had basically similar, not careers, but similar situations. So they're digging into PLM over a long time and then realizing after time that the question of sustainability is important to us and try to combine it. Could you talk a little bit about how this evolved at CIMdata? So CIMdata is known for the PLM area and for other areas, but why is the sustainability now important to CIMdata, and how do you look into the market for this kind of things?
Okay. Well, as you're aware, CIMdata has been around for 40 years, and this had been growing over time. They very much were believers in circularity, and they have various practices. So I can't speak for Peter Belillo, the president and CEO of CIMdata, but I know when we had a discussion in June of this year, he was very much on board with starting a practice in this area, an area that I'm obviously passionate about. I know from looking back that companies and people at CIMdata have been interested in this since about 2015. So, they've dabbled in it a little bit, but we started it as a full-time practice when I came aboard in the summer, in July.
Right, because when you mentioned indeed circularity, I remember the CIMdata roadmap conferences with PDT, and there was always the circular economy or circularity on the agenda as part of the conference. So it was not completely new in the area of CIMdata, I think.
Right.
But now we have a topic, sustainability. Every company has it in its mission statement. So I'm curious, how do you connect as CIMdata to this mission statement? Are you asked to help them, or do they recognize that PLM is part of their needed skills to be more sustainable? How does it work at the moment?
You're asking between companies and CIMdata?
Yeah.
Yes. So they have approached us, and we believe what we can do is provide leadership to companies that are transitioning to sustainable, carbon-free products and assets. So this is a mega trend, and specifically, we focus on a couple areas. So one is helping them reduce their product carbon footprint. Another is assisting in sustainable, eco-friendly design. We believe that sustainability should be embedded in PLM, in the business strategy, and in the enabling technologies through life, and in empowering circularity and the elimination of waste, increasing recycling, reuse, repurposing of materials and assets. So that and evaluating new technologies and providing strategic management consulting to help companies transform to meet the demands of a net zero future. That's the focus of our practice. And that's what we're working with companies to do.
Okay, I think our first session we had with SAP, and they are very much on the execution side. Darren West at that time also said 80% of the carbon emissions, the impact of the product on the field, is done during the design phase. So this is, for me, also one of the signs to say it's important that PLM is involved. From the other hand, on the PLM side, we're not so good in measuring. We are more measuring on the outcomes. And how do you see this in your consultancy? Are you pushing companies to be more digital, data-driven as part of their sustainability strategies?
Yeah, absolutely. So in order to reduce a product carbon footprint, you've got two things going on. As you say, 80% of the environmental impact is actually occurring in the design phase, and about 65 to 95% of the greenhouse gas emissions are in the scope 3 or the supply chain, right? So that tells you right there that product design and the supply chain, or product design and sourcing, have got to work together in a data-driven way, right? So as a designer, and I've managed in 3 different companies, I've managed design groups, and I've, with half my career on the solution provider side, the other half being on the engineering side, and I've also worked with sourcing and manufacturing. It's clear that these groups have got to be able to come together. You need, as a designer, you're not going to reduce a car, you're not going to change anything unless you have visibility to it. So you need to actually see the CO2e, or the carbon equivalent, in the supply chain, or you're not going to know how to reduce it. So that visibility into the materials, that's where PLM has to play a role. The old way, I don't want to really call it the old way, but what people had been doing, using kind of just LCAs and after the fact trying to figure out what they've done, that's not going to help you innovate and reduce your product carbon footprint as you move forward, right? That visibility needs to be there, and PLM has to be able to change to help, right?
A question that came up when you talked about the supply chain, do you see already companies focusing on carbon certificates for their products or their components?
Some, right? That's not the majority, but the people that are out in the forefront are working with their supply chain a lot of them are developing strategic relationships. They're doing things like having zero RFQs in place so they can reduce the time, but that's kind of the key, right? That you are reducing your supply chain down to net zero. And as the supplier, this is kind of the key to everything. This can be a competitive advantage. If you are the supplier and you commit to net zero by, say, 2030, and you make commitments to sustainability, you're going to be more valuable to, let's say you provide an energy product to a utility company. Well, they have those same goals, right? So if, there's company A, B, and C, you're company B, and you've got that, then all things being equal, you've got a competitive differentiator.
Right. And I think here we still have a way to go. I was hearing some weeks ago, one of my customers, a tier 2 supplier, their OEM pushed them to buy carbon certificates. So their products seem to be more green, but the product doesn't change. It's still the same material and quality, but it's now compensated a little bit with carbon certificates. So we have still a way to go.
Yeah. So I'm not a big fan of carbon certificates, and real quickly, there's something called. We've got a long way to go here with companies, but there's a science-based net zero, and there's a lot of companies out there that say they'll be carbon neutral by a given date. There's a big difference between being carbon neutral and a company picking a date. And there's some very impressive, I just looked at a very impressive company. They've done a great job. They'll be carbon neutral by 2030. And I got to tell you, that does not mean they're net zero. Their supply chain still has tons of emissions because they're relying on certificates and things like that. In the science-based net zero, which is evolving and getting stronger, your scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3 emissions with no carbon offsets can be used to be a validated science-based net zero. So there are some companies doing it without any kind of certificates, offsets, that they may do something like that, but it has to be beyond the 100% net zero. Now, the vast majority of companies are not there today, right? Estimate you have 20% that are on the right track. And there are many companies that are kind of fudging it the way that you're suggesting, but that's not going to hold up very long.
I'm curious, Mark, are you mainly talking with American customers or also with European and Asian customers? And do you see differences between them?
Our business in this area is similar to our business in general, which is about 40% North America, 40% Europe, 20% Asia. This year is an uptick in Asia. But in this area, a little bit more proactive in Europe and in Nordic countries. But I think the bigger point is it's really the companies that are either most impacted or there's someone in their industry impacting them. So you could be, say, in the energy business or the automotive business. So automotive's kind of obvious. If you're in the EV market, I don't have that slide, but there's a slide that just came out recently that showed all the EV makers and the ones that were most compliant. And it wasn't who you would think. So some of the biggest names were down at the bottom of the list when they looked into their supply chain. But companies that have that thrown in their face, they tend to react. Energy companies, where there's a focus on them, they tend to react. So some of them have absolutely embraced it.
Right. Yeah, you're talking about the EV companies. I mean, I also saw, yeah, it's now a huge list of companies that are working on it. The main question you ask yourself, is there enough battery for all those, if we want to scale up, or do we need to do things different?
Well, clearly when it comes down to minerals like cobalt and things like that, and if you just look at where you get cobalt from, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Russia, sixth on the list, I think, was Cuba. It looks like there could be a problem, right? So this is like, we get all our oil from Russia, not to worry, right? Well, you should worry, right? So there have got to be, there's no way to keep using batteries. And by the way, batteries are just not using for EVs. They're used more and more in the energy for certain types of storage as well. So these same minerals, you've got to do a much better job of recycling them. And historically, even if you look at solar panels, they essentially glue them together so they last 15 years. Well, in order to get the zinc and copper out of them, you'd have to heat them up in order to get them out and recycle them. Now, there are laws going into effect that are going to cause the design to change. So disassembly is more important, right? So we can reuse these minerals.
So here we have talked about clean energy. Do you also see companies moving to more a circular strategy, like becoming more product as a service owner, that they provide the product as a service, kind of leasing, and then make it upgradable, repairable? And that's also one of the aims of the circular economy. Do you see this happening? And if yes, what type of industries?
Yes, not at the rate that you'd probably would want to see, but we've sort of seen this, whether it's Airbnb or more people want the service, right? So it's when someone ultimately disrupts the market and says, hey, you can get this form of energy as a service and not have to worry about it. So to some extent, they're not there yet, but if you look at like renewable wind turbines, you're still really buying them, but they are maintaining them through life, right? So some of these companies have, and I worked on one where the PLM system has real digital twins. Every part that gets changed, they know it. They see it. The efficiency goes in there, and in that industry, they're causing each other to get better and better and better. One right now is right around the new year, stated that they're going to be completely sustainable by 2040. That means the concrete, that means the resin in the blades, the steel, the carbon emissions have to go away, which, for companies that do that, then the platform as a service becomes a a real issue. And it's also in many different industries. It's occurring in medical device type fields as well. So equipment in hospitals, does a hospital really want to own it? Or can they just get it as a service and get the upgrades? And everywhere that you have that platform as a service, you're going to see more and more digital twins because it's a more efficient way for the company to offer upgrades. They make more money and they lower their costs.
So you're making an interesting point there. If you go to platform as a service, then suddenly a service becomes an important topic also. Historically, I would say PLM was always on the front end side, pushing products into the market and then let them go, or let's see what we can do. Do you see also a trend that in particular the service part of products becomes also a driver for PLM when we start designing and building products? Do they have service in mind and operations?
Yeah, well, you're only going to be successful in the future. This is a key point that we focus on. When you're designing for sustainability, you have to be designing with the end of life in mind, right? Future products won't have any waste, so you have to figure out what you will do to end the life of that product, even after you've replaced it and reused the materials. And, where does that concrete go that is in that wind turbine, right? Ultimately, that has to go back into nature somehow. So you definitely have to completely rethink and design in a more eco-friendly, sustainable way. Or you're going to be upset by somebody who does. You'll be disrupted by somebody who does.
And what is next for the companies? I mean, what do you see as their biggest challenge? Because in one way, we have a generation that is used to push products in the market. And I think to change this engine, there's a lot of work to do. Where would you start and where would the CIMdata do the pushing?
Yeah, and let me just preface this by saying that the real motivation for all this, well, is the climate change that's occurring, but that's causing people to become more aware. It's causing investors to apply more pressure. It's causing CEOs to wake up. Either they wake up due to the investors or their competitors, possibly policymakers and regulations. And this is where we're at today in general, then they might turn to a chief sustainability officer or somebody, but once they try to figure out how to do it, it's like crickets. They can't figure it out, right? Because they're not used to, they're going to people that have grown up thinking a different way. We go off, we buy it, we consume it, we throw it away, right? So the first thing that comes to mind is, do we really have to do this? How much is it going to cost? That's not the way to think about it, right? And this is where PLM plays a bigger role, because PLM touches everything. It touches all products, right? So it's an opportunity. And those people that are already digitally enabled are good at PLM. They have a real opportunity because those are the people that we can help, right? If you're not even close to that, then there's significant hurdles to overcome.
Right. Just an interesting point came up to me, especially because your background also with GE. I remember some 8-10 years ago, there was a chief digital officer at GE, because then digitalization was the big hype. Is the CDO now the CSO of the company with a similar mission to create awareness, to motivate people, to align people?
In order to, yeah, I don't want to speak badly about chief sustainable officers or or chief digital officers, but you bring up a good point. And by the way, for any GE people that are listening, I love GE, but when Jeff Immelt decided that he was going to be one of the top 5, software companies, that wasn't going to happen, right? So, and what you really need is leadership from the top that says, we're going to be a sustainable company, and everyone, these are the goals, and everyone's going to learn or relearn what it takes to do that. So where there's education in companies, and these are things that I look at, if companies are educating everybody to rethink what it means to be sustainable, how to make modular products, what does dematerializing mean, what is green chemistry, what are all these things that we have to now consider. If that's not like the major theme in the whole company, right? And it's the whole company. If it just dies with the chief sustainability officer, they're not going to be able to change it's the culture that has to change. It has to be like a movement, right? So that when I see it just delegated off to a chief digital officer or chief sustainability officer, I worry.
Do you think that the PLM strategies in the companies are ready to support these additional service aspect and the sustainability aspects, or is the industry too far away to realize this kind of approach?
So regardless of how far away they are, someone's going to fill this gap, right? Mm-hmm. So I kind of use the analogy of a sinking ship. I've been on 2. It's kind of the nature of growing up near a barrier island, right? And at first, we're all having our own conversations. It's not that big a deal. And even when the engine conks out and the people that are the most knowledgeable go and look at it, some people are concerned, but not everyone's concerned, right? But ultimately, when water's leaking in and the ship is really sinking, everybody starts to get concerned, right? So everyone will start putting in an effort and making it better. So your product lifecycle in general to achieve sustainability is going to become a bigger and bigger deal.
Yeah.
Right.
What happened to me is that I follow the PLM vendors, the major PLM vendors anyway. But with the topic of sustainability, basically, I had to look further into new software pieces and other providers. Is it something CIMdata has to do as well to
Yes.
basically broaden the portfolio, so to say, about other vendors?
Absolutely. You're at a stage here where you have a lot of startups, you have a lot of companies that were coming in from the environmental sustainability area that had much more expertise, and the PLM vendors who PLM vendors and systems integrators who now see a need, right? People are coming to them and they hadn't been focused on it for years and years and years. So just to give you an analogy, and it's hard to really blame anybody here, but if I go back to that net zero thing, today there are about 2,500 companies that have science-based net zero commitments. In 2016, there were 13, right? So a lot has to change. And so the same thing is happening in the PLM industry, right? You have a lot of new companies, and a lot of the PLM vendors that the names we know, are also working with different providers and trying to figure out a roadmap. And we're right in the middle of that.
Are the classical PLM vendors ready for it? Sorry, Jos. Are the classical PLM vendors ready for this challenge?
Well, first off, CIMdata does 70% of our business with industrial companies, and the other 30% is with virtually all the PLM vendors and systems integrators. So I don't want to make a blanket statement. Are they ready for them? You know, everyone's in a different place. Are they all starting to get very focused on it? Yeah, because it's kind of like companies. Some companies are, there's the early adopters who are out in front, and there's some people who are still saying, is this Netflix thing really real? Do I really have to react to it? Mm-hmm. So they're all over. But I think the PLM vendors are starting to react pretty quickly, right? So I think you're going to see more and more capability and change, and with any megatrend like this, there'll be more opportunities to partner with companies that most people that had been around PLM hadn't heard of.
Yeah, and I think the important lessons learned in the world of PLM, there is no easy swap. It's not like a technology swap from old phone to smartphone. No, you have your legacy data, and in our business, you don't swap so fast. I mean,
that's true, and this is the problem that companies face as well. Right?
So noticing the time, Mark, we're almost reaching the end. Are there any points that you say, okay, this is a message to our audience in the PLM Global Green Alliance that you should follow up? Are you going to provide us with some links or topics to study, points that CIMdata will focus on?
Yeah, I can. So, at CIMdata, we think sustainability is reaching kind of a critical point where it's no longer a choice, but ultimately, over the next couple of years, it's going to be a responsibility in a whole variety of industries, right? Because there's carbon and everything. And consumer sentiment, public policy, advancements in science, technology are all causing companies to rethink sustainability. We didn't, and so let me just get to for more information, you can certainly reach out to me. My contact information is on this screen on the left.
Yeah.
I did and so there's a page on the CIMdata website there, a link to that. We did a webinar back in January, which I think's pretty useful, covers a little, so people can go and see that. We have the industry forum in March in Ann Arbor for solution providers. So if they're listening, we're presenting at that. We're presenting a survey that we took through the months of January and February with industrial clients, so you can see where they're at. There'll be another webinar which also provides the results of that survey and some additional information on April the 27th. And I've got a couple links to articles I've recently written in Power Magazine and Industry Today. So there's plenty to consume.
Okay, good. Yes, I think we are in a stage of we have to educate ourselves and our environments. And therefore also thank you for this session. Klaus, a final question, word from your side?
No, I ask all my questions. I'm good.
Okay, then thank you, Mark, very much for your insights. Yeah, and we're all striving for the same purpose, to be more sustainable, thanks to PLM. So thank you very much, and
Okay.
see you soon. Bye bye.
Okay.
Goodbye.